Hello, welcome. You're watching World Now. Let's quickly have a look at all the international updates. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken landed in Tel Aviv and met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Antony Blinken said that Israel had the right and the obligation to defend itself after the Hamas attack. Speaking on the death toll, he said that the number of US citizens who have died in the war has risen to at least 25. Israeli President Isaac Herzog expressed gratitude to the US for their support as he stood alongside visiting US State Secretary Antony Blinken in Tel Aviv. Israeli Prime Minister said Hamas should be crushed and treated the same way as the Islamic State group. The Israeli leader added that the terrorist group has shown itself to be an enemy of civilization. Antony Blinken made an unscheduled visit to a donation center in Tel Aviv. During the visit, he spoke with the survivor of Hamas attack on the open-air tribe of Nova Music Festival. Vice President Kamala Harris arrived in Charleston, South Carolina, and spoke about the one of many calls that she joined on between President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israeli President Isaac Herzog claimed that rescue teams which removed bodies from villages after the Hamas attack found signs of torture. British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly pledged his support for Israel after meeting survivors of Hamas attack. Israeli airstrikes pounded the Gaza Strip as the Israeli military said it was preparing for a possible ground operation. Russian President Putin said he considers the US policy in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process a failure. He added that the US has practically moved away from the previous international instruments for resolving this issue. The Israeli Defense Forces chief military spokesperson said that the Israeli army has notified the families of 97 Israelis are believed to be in Hamas captivity. An Israeli soldier killed in the fighting with Hamas last week was buried in Jerusalem. British relatives of people believed to have been taken hostage in recent Hamas raids in Israel appealed for their release, failing to hold back the tears as they begged for help to find their families. Biden administration has announced a new package of US aid for Ukraine to aid in its fight against Russia. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby gave reporters at the White House details on the weaponry which are being provided under Presidential Drawdown Authority. United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon urged all sides to avoid confrontation as tensions in the region continue to rise. House Minority Leader Hakeem arrived at the US Capitol urging his Republican colleagues in the House to end their internal fighting and get to work for the sake of the American people. Russian President Putin said events that are happening amid the Israel-Hamas conflict are terrible, and he also said that this is a big issue and there is a very big tightening on both sides. People continued to lay flowers at a makeshift memorial outside the Israeli embassy in the Russian capital on the sixth day of the latest Israel-Palestinian war. Residents of Ramallah city in the occupied West Bank expressed mixed feelings regarding Hamas' recent attack in southern Israel and the subsequent Israeli retaliation. The South Asian workers living in Israel spoke of their fears about staying in the country following last weekend's Hamas attacks. Israeli military presence was high at the northern border with Lebanon. The Lebanese army said troops found the launcher used to fire rockets into northern Israel from southern Lebanon. The ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict has led to a worsening humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, which is now facing severe shortage of electricity and water supply. Residents searched for survivors under the rubble of a collapsed building that was hit by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. President Putin arrived in Kyrgyzstan on a rare trip abroad for the Russian leader, who was indicted earlier this year by the International Criminal Court for war crimes in Ukraine. Ecuadorian presidential candidate Daniel Noboa defines himself as a defender of free enterprise and with a vocation for social service. IMF Managing Director Georgieva has said countries are stepping up with finances for the most vulnerable of the world. An adorable panda cub with quite a character got a taste of rebellion against his keeper at the Chengdu research base of giant panda breeding in southwest China's Sichuan province. In the Prime Video fantasy show based on best-selling series by the same name, the world is more or less run by a group of women who can channel the one power. The scene at Shifa Hospital in Gaza City was a grisly reflection of the chaos around it, even as workers mopped up blood and relatives rushed children with shrapnel wounds into surgery. Explosions thundered outside. Relatives and friends of people killed in Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip gathered at a hospital to collect their bodies. Israeli President Isaac Herzog said that the country's military forces were conducting operations according to international law. Israeli warplanes pounded the Shati refugee camp along the Mediterranean Sea in Gaza City, reducing entire swaths of the crowded camp to ruins. Canada confirmed that it will be transporting Canadian citizens from Israel to Athens with the help of its Air Force. Speaking ahead of the NATO Defence Summit in Brussels, Canadian Defence Minister said that those transferred to Greece would then be able to return to Canada via commercial means. Following days-long shelling and clashes along the Lebanese-Israel border between Hezbollah militants and Israeli troops, Lebanon's southern border area has turned into ghost towns as residents fled and shops closed. As per Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 3 nationals have been confirmed dead and 2 others remain missing in the ongoing Palestine-Israel conflict. The IMF said in its latest report that Middle East economies are gradually recovering as external shocks associated with the Ukraine war and global inflation fade, with growth projected to improve next year. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said Moscow hopes that once the conflict between Israel and Hamas is over, everyone will take seriously the responsibility of creating a Palestinian state. Chancellor Olaf Scholz underlined Germany's historical responsibility of Israel's security. In his governmental declaration, Scholz assailed Iran's role in the region, but said that there was no proof of Iran's real support in Hamas' weekend attack. German Defense Minister said from Brussels, Germany is turning over to Israel up to 2 combat drones that were already in Israel for the training of German service people. Taiwan is closely watching the war in the Middle East sparked by the unprecedented attack on Israel by Hamas terrorists from Gaza for lessons amid what the self-governing island says is a campaign of intimidation and threats by China. China said that 3 Chinese nationals have been confirmed dead in the Israel-Palestinian war. Foreign Ministry spokesperson further claimed that the 2 others were missing and several have been injured. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin reiterated the importance of NATO the second day of a defense ministers' meeting focused on Ukraine but overshadowed the war in Israel. The first Thai nationals evacuated since the deadly violence in Israel landed in Bangkok. 2 of the evacuees were in wheelchairs. Supporters of Palestinians held a rally in Chicago. Supporters of both Palestinians and Israel have held demonstrations throughout the U.S. since the war began between Israel and Hamas. The Russian Olympic Committee was suspended by the IOC for breaching the Olympic Charter by incorporating sports bodies in 4 regions in eastern Ukraine. Women dressed in silk blazers and sparkly dresses, men wearing the latest trends. That was a part of the Dubai Fashion Week. The show's second edition kicked off in the Emirate with 4 runaway shows. The German government has drawn up legislation to ease deportations of unsuccessful asylum seekers and plans to discuss measures to tackle migration with the opposition as it tries to defuse what has become a major political problem. Mike Skinner is doing it all himself. He wrote, directed and edited as well as starred in movie The Darker the Shadow, The Brighter the Light. Adam Deacon is back and Ed Sheeran is acting in new British comedy Motherhood, making fun of the black urban genre that is seen in shows like Top Boy and in the adulthood series. Playing video games has long been a challenge for many people with disabilities, since the traditional controllers for the PlayStation, Xbox or Nintendo can be difficult or even impossible to maneuver when a person has limited mobility.